Hey, happy Friday the 13th. I haven't done one of these in a while, but every Friday the 13th, I like to cover another Friday the 13th movie, and though I'm not as excited to cover this one, I know Jason Takes Manhattan has its fans, but get ready for the slow ride into the most terrible era of the franchise. Since I've covered the first through 7 installments, it's time for part 8. It must be done. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Friday the 13th, Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, was released on July 28, 1989, and it's streaming on HBO MAX. It's directed and written by Rob Hedden. So we're getting into the darker days of the Friday the 13th franchise. These are the desperate times where Paramount gives up the idea that they want to tell an original story, one of the main reasons I love the first 6 films, since they fit together so well, and instead tries to break the norm and simply toss new challenges and scenarios for Jason to face. In installments 7, 8, 9, and 10 of this series, you can literally picture the writer's room where someone pitches a producer an out-of-the-box pitch, and the producer taps his chin and then finally says, "Brilliant, let's do it," only seeing potential dollar signs and not taking into account what the fans really wanted to see. It's because of this desperation that I dislike these 4 films the most in the franchise. Still, there's a lot to talk about, some good, but mostly bad, when it comes to Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Right off the bat, the change from previous Friday the 13th film is evident. We don't get the classic Manfredini score that has accompanied so many of the more effective Friday the 13th films. Instead, we get an ominous radio DJ saying ominous things as we look over every set piece that will come into play when Jason finally gets to New York. Songwriter Fred Moline's Darkest Side of the Night instead is played. It's a horrific 80s tune that sets the stage for the crap to come. The entire film panders to the MTV crowd without the actual, catchy music and all. It's even got a cute rocker chick, JJ, one of the more interesting kids on the boat, who dies way too soon and is played by Saffron Henderson. She rocks out with a guitar in the bowels of the ship before Jason smashes her head in with said guitar. This paired with the changing of the classic kill, kill, kill sound effect to simply Jason, Jason, Jason is another unnecessary change that really takes away a lot of the creepiness. Now instead of the voice of his mother, Jason inexplicably hears his name over and over. Why? Who knows? But that's just the beginning of the changes director Rob Hedden had in mind for this film, and that's ultimately why it doesn't work. It feels like Hedden wanted to make his mark by changing important factors in order to tell his new story. Sure, it sounds good, but when you change things that make the character the actual character, then it's just not the character anymore. Many of the horrible tropes associated with the series are exploited to the nth degree here, most notably Jason's power of teleportation. Sure, there's the usual Jason bopping around the ship killing kids and other cast members, but in this film, Jason out and out teleports. There are scenes where Jason is at the bottom of a ladder, and the next second, he's tossing someone off of the top of the ladder. Jason doesn't even walk in this film. He simply stands there and then appears close to the victim as he or she runs away, and then he pops up again. Hedden seems to think this makes Jason more threatening, but while supernatural forces brought Jason back to life, Jason has always been more effective as a ground-level juggernaut to be reckoned with. It's just laughably bad the way Jason is everywhere here, much more obvious than previous films, but nuance and subtlety is just not welcome in Jason Takes Manhattan. The story revolves around a typical virginal final girl, Rennie, played by Jensen Daggett, who is dealing with a repressed memory of almost drowning as a child and possibly encountering the ghost of Jason in Crystal Lake. It's a concept that's already been dealt with in Part 3 with Chris remembering a possible rape at the hands of Jason, and again in Part 7 as Tina, who flashes back to see both her father and Jason as she develops her psychic powers. Flashbacks are a constant in this series, as Pamela was haunted by flashbacks of her son's death in the original, so at least the film stays true to form while not being very original. Rennie is among the rest of her graduating class, the last class to graduate Crystal Lake High. I guess Jason killed the rest. I think it would have been an interesting angle to go into with these kids all growing up around the legend of Jason. It would have separated this installment from the rest, because those kids were coming from out of town. But none of that is explored here. Why do that when you can simply up the kill count by killing randos? Against the wishes of her asshole uncle, played by Peter Mark Rickman, who really is one of the most despicable characters in the entire series, Rennie joins the rest of her class on a trip by cruise ship from Crystal Lake to New York. The story quickly revives Jason again, played by Kane Hodder, via an anchor dragging a power cable to recharge his body. Hey, it worked in part 6. Why come up with something new for this one? So he hops on the boat and begins killing everybody on board. Eventually, they get to New York. And I guess that's where this film gets criticized the most. The first hour of the film takes place on a boat instead of New York, as the title suggests. This was due to budget limitations, with many of the New York scenes being filmed in Canada instead. The fact that this film doesn't even deliver what the title suggests until the last half hour is one of the main reasons it's been panned. But the worst crime, in my opinion, is how bland it all really is. There just isn't any punch to any of these characters here, and any who do come off with any charisma are killed off quickly. Even Hodder himself seems bored with what he's doing. There are some quality kills in this installment. Everyone mentions the extended boxing scene between Julius, played by Vincent Craig Dupree, and Jason on top of the building, and it is a good one, as his head is punched clean off, rolls down the building, and into a dumpster, with the lid closing as a final punctuation for the scene. But I prefer the death of the Admiral, played by Warren Munson, which is really nicely filmed as Jason creeps up behind him in slow-mo and cuts his throat, or the awesome death scene by strangulation, which was a first in the series, in the disco room as Jason holds Ava, played by a super young Kelly Hu, by the throat and then slams her down super hard onto the dance floor. Those deaths aside, there are some horribly lame deaths that occur off camera and even lamer in shadow that do nothing but to up the body count. Because the cast is so big, all of these characters, such as the bitchy character, the camera nerd, the rocker, and some of the other more interesting characters who are killed off immediately, don't really get enough screen time. Rennie is okay, but there's really not a lot to her other than the hallucinations that have been plaguing her since she's a kid. She's just a walking trauma case. Meanwhile, her boyfriend, Sean, played by Scott Reeves, is as lame as they come. I really despise everything about him. From his floppy jacket to his stilted line delivery, he really is one of the worst actors in the entire movie. The meta beats used for comic effect really never registered with me. As Jason finally gets to New York, he sees a billboard of a hockey team with a giant hockey mask and tilts his head, acknowledging the resemblance. Not to get too nerdy, but I doubt Jason would have the insight to know what he looks like with the mask on. I always thought Jason wore the mask out of shame of his face, something he most likely was tormented with as a kid by the counselors and the kids alike. Worse yet, the scene where Jason tilts his mask back and shows the street punks his face and scares them away is equally groan-inducing for the same reason. Maybe Jason is owning up to his disfigured looks, but for someone who's always worn a bag or a hockey mask to hide his face, it just seems out of character to have him reveal himself so flippantly. Sure, it makes for a good laugh, but it's at the expense of the character. Jason's look for the film is somewhat different than what can arguably be his most impressive look from Part 7 by FX artist/director John Carl Buechler. Here, Jason is a slimy and wet mess with multiple shots of oozing slime coming out of his wounds and when Jason grips something. I actually kind of like this waterlogged effect, but once the mask comes off, whoa Nelly, is it horrifically bad. Underneath the hockey mask looks like something a high schooler whittled together with plaster of Paris in an art class. This is by far the worst looking Jason face reveal of the series. Even worse is the strange crumbling Jason face we get during the climax. It's a true effects low point of the series. The nonsensical ending is one of the things that really made me mad when I first saw Part 8, and to this day, it still cheeses my crackers. For some reason, the sewers of New York are flooded with toxic sludge, as a sewage worker informs our two surviving cast members towards the end of the film. This pretty much goes hand in hand with the let's just do a bunch of random shit mentality this film is built on. Why not have Jason fight crocodiles in the sewers too? That actually sounds much cooler. But the exorcism of Jason's spirit by toxic waste is by far the stupidest thing about this already ridiculous movie. Yes, having Rennie haunted by the ghost of the little boy Jason is okay, but having Jason somehow suddenly speak, vomit a gallon of water, which is something Hodder actually did on cue, a talent that most likely made him a hit at parties, and then melt away into the form of a little boy it's just so stupid to me. Since Rennie is injected with heroin or some kind of drug when she's abducted by the punks, one could write the whole idiotic sequence off to Rennie just tripping balls, which is what I prefer to do. Speaking of which, Jason Takes Manhattan really goes dark at this point, and I don't really think they knew how dark it went when the pair of punks abduct Rennie, plan on raping her, and shoot her up with drugs. It's a really uncomfortable scene to sit through. What's worst is that Riley may have escaped the wrath of Jason by the end, but after being stuck with that dirty syringe, it's quite evident that our little virginal final girl is riddled with full-blown AIDS and is a goner anyway. Just another 80s trope to think about. Random tidbit time. The cook who comes out of the kitchen from the diner to take care of Jason in the final moments is actually Ken Kurtzinger, who later played Jason in Freddy vs. Jason. It's kind of a cool factoid that Hodder and Kurtzinger got to have an albeit brief but cool sparring match in this film. In trying to do something new and different with Part 8, they forgot what made Friday the 13th films good in the first place. While there are some quality kills here, and Hodder is always fun as Jason with his simmering rage that he exuded with the character, Hedden's decisions to spice up what didn't need spice is what ultimately murders the film. In the interviews in the supplementary material, Hedden blames budget for the problems with Jason Takes Manhattan. The original script had Jason on the Statue of Liberty and boxing in Madison Square Garden, so I guess we dodged a bullet there. Interesting enough, Part 8 originally was going to go the Dream Warriors route and have Tina, played by Lar Park Lincoln, from Part 7 return and counsel a bunch of survivors. But when Lincoln asked for more money, they balked and started a new script from scratch. That idea sounds infinitely more interesting than what we got with Jason Takes Manhattan.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're